Hello, we're glad you've joined us for this live webinar, Understanding the Analytical Techniques Required to Characterize Cannabis and Hemp Samples. I'm Judy O'Rourke of Labroots, and I'll be moderating this session. Today's educational web seminar is presented by Labroots, the leading scientific social networking website and provider of virtual events and webinars advancing scientific collaboration and learning. It's brought to you by PerkinElmer. PerkinElmer is a global leader focused on improving the health and safety of people and their environment. With analytical instrumentation, illumination, and detection technologies, and leading laboratory services, they focus on improving the integrity and safety of the world we live in. Additionally, PerkinElmer provides a partner for your cannabis analytical needs. They know analyzing cannabis can be challenging, from setting up a laboratory, developing methods to ensure maximum throughput of samples, generating client reports, to preserving data integrity. More importantly, as state and country rules and regulations evolve, cannabis labs need instrumentation and support that can meet new and stricter demands. Difficult matrices like these require the highest sensitivity and greatest performance than ever before. To learn more, please visit www.perkinelmer.com/cannabis. Let's get started. You can pose questions to the speaker during the presentation while they're fresh in your mind. To do so, simply type them into the drop-down box located on the far left of your screen labeled Ask a Question and click on the Send button. Questions will be answered after the presentation. To enlarge the slide window, click on the arrows at the top right-hand corner of the presentation window. If you experience technical problems seeing or hearing the presentation, just click on the Support tab found at the top right of the presentation window, or report your problem by typing it into the Answer a Question box located on the far left of your screen. This is an educational webinar and thus offers free continuing education credits. Please click on the Continuing Education Credits tab located at the top right of the presentation window and follow the process of obtaining your credits. I now present today's speaker, Toby Astill, Ph.D., the Senior Business Manager for Cannabis and Hemp Markets at PerkinElmer. Dr. Astill has a Ph.D. in chemistry and has spent the last 10 years working in science, technology, and business roles for leading technology companies. For the last 7 years, he has worked for PerkinElmer, based in locations across the west coast of Canada and the U.S. Dr. Astill is now focused on driving PerkinElmer's global cannabis and health initiatives, including, but not limited to, new product development, market and industry research, collaboration agreements with customers, application content development, and field marketing initiatives. Dr. Astill will now begin his presentation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you to Labroots for giving me this opportunity. It's an exciting time to be talking about cannabis and hemp science. Starting on slide 1, I'd like to just introduce myself again. I'm based in Canada but cover the globe. And today we'll be speaking about cannabis and hemp science and how PerkinElmer can support your laboratory needs. For those that don't know PerkinElmer yet, we are a U.S. company with over 11,000 employees around the globe. We're 87 years old, and we have a significant amount of activity in cannabis and hemp under our food division, where we look at the human and environmental science around these applications. Starting from the very beginning, and this predates me, but approximately 2,700 years ago, cannabis was first seen or identified in Asia. Since then, through various channels, it's circulated the globe. And now, in a number of countries, it is in a legal capacity. It's not always been used for recreational and medicinal uses. Cannabis and hemp have been used for a number of different products and applications in the past, with generations relying on the fiber and food for their daily lives. More recently, we've seen an increased usage of the medicinal component of this material, which we'll be focusing in today. But just to provide some clarity, understanding on cannabis and hemp. Really, they come from the same species of plant, and depending on the chemistry, they can be classified as cannabis and hemp. This is an ongoing discussion, but federally, the FDA classifies hemp as having 0.3% or less THC in the plant. What you're looking at here is an example of cannabis on the left and hemp on the right. They look very similar, but can have different chemistries. And if they are a hemp chemistry, it can be transported across state lines in the U.S., whereas cannabis cannot. And because of this federal legality, there's a number of different environments that people are working with cannabis. And those are usually at a state level, as each state that has a recreational or medicinal market has identified the testing and regulatory framework necessary. But we do realize that this is a Schedule I substance, so it has to be treated accordingly for any shipping or international matters. But regardless of being Schedule I, we are now seeing a huge growth in the medicinal and recreational cannabis markets in the U.S. This slide shows us that over 30 states now have a medical program for cannabis. 9 have a recreational program, and 16 have a CBD or hemp program, and only 4 states have no activity. This leads to a lot of science being done in laboratories across the country, and a huge amount of new scientists and technicians and engineers entering the cannabis and hemp science space. Also to note, just to the north, Canada went recreationally legal last month on October 17th. This was a huge milestone for Canada, as it is the largest country to have recreational cannabis. What this allows in Canada is importing and exporting of cannabis products. So we are seeing international markets emerge with South America, Australia, Europe, the UK, etc. So a lot of activity has happened in the last 2 or 3 years in Canada and continues to grow. And one reference I like to speak to is how quickly this industry is growing as a whole. For those that remember the VHS tape, every household in America and if not the globe quickly adopted VHS as the most preferred media for watching movies. What we can do is compare the growth of VHS acceptance to the growth of the cannabis and hemp market. We see that on this slide here, and we see that the green star is the trajectory for the cannabis industry, and we see it growing much faster than the VHS. So this supports that a lot of science and activity that's happening now is only going to be happening more in the near future. So it's an exciting time to be involved in this industry. But bringing it back to the chemistry, cannabis and hemp are very complex matrices. And within the plant, within the flower, within the leaves and the stalk, there are a number of different chemistry groups that some get a lot of attention and some not so much. Briefly, a lot of people are focused on the cannabinoids. Those are the medicinal components that often the plant is valued by. And we also see a lot of people characterizing the terpenes of that same plant. These are the volatiles that we'll go into in more detail later. But we also see there's a number of other chemistries, and some of these are very important as well, depending on the product of the cannabis at the end of the processing step. And those products can be very different. Traditionally or historically, most people associate a cannabis flower as the final product from a cannabis plant. But what we're seeing today, for various reasons, particularly in the recreational markets, is a huge diversity in the sample type. What we're looking at here is some common categories for cannabis and hemp products. Extracts are products from using a solvent to remove the cannabinoids and terpenes from the flower. Those solvents can be butane, ethanol, CO2, even water at times. But the extracts are often highly concentrated and very homogeneous, so they can be used and incorporated into various products. Below we see an example of edibles, beverages, and even novelty items with THC-infused toothpicks. As a chemist, these can be quite challenging to handle in the lab and to be quite challenging to get quantitative data from these very diverse starting points. But it's an exciting time to explore. But what we do see across all of the cannabis and hemp markets in the laboratory environment is that there's very little standard methodology. And this does present a significant problem. It can lead to inaccurate results, false positives, or just general poor practices in the lab. There's also multiple techniques suggested with 30-plus methods circulating about. Labs struggle to find the right one or two. And also, as a biological sample, the variance in the sample itself is significant. So depending on where the sample is selected from the plant, from the top, middle, or bottom, you'll see a variation in the cannabinoid concentration. You'll also see final products having variability depending on how they were mixed or made. These all present a unique opportunity for PerkinElmer and the cannabis and hemp support team because ultimately we're concerned about the human environmental health in this market. So we can address this with a number of resources to help the industry standardize. So where I'd like to start is a quick snapshot of the chemistry involved in the California market. I've chosen California because it has a fairly comprehensive and well thought out list of chemistries that people have to test for to be compliant in their market. Every state will decide upon this list, and some states have similar, some states have more, some have less. But California is a good example because it includes the cannabinoids on the top left, the terpenes, and the residual solvents, the heavy metals, and then finally on the right, the pesticides and the mycotoxins. What I'd like today is to walk you through each of these methods and assays to speak a little bit more about the chemistry and some of the challenges that can present themselves. And with an overall objective of being able to support with an SOP, that's standard operating procedure, and the resources from PerkinElmer to allow the lab to be successful. This is a quick snapshot of the instrumentation that most cannabis labs need to comply to the California list. As you'll notice, it's a multiple instrument portfolio. Unfortunately, not one instrument is able to test all the chemistries in California. And this is similar for the other markets where testing is required, and also other countries like Canada. But very briefly, you'll hear the acronyms ICP-MS, inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry, which is used for heavy metals. You'll hear GC-MS, gas chromatography mass spectrometry, Headspace analysis, used for the residual solvents, terpenes, and flavonoids. You'll hear HPLC, or high-pressure liquid chromatography, for testing the cannabinoid or hemp potency. And lastly, you'll hear LC-MS-MS, or liquid chromatography mass spec, or LC-MS triple quad. And this technique is used for pesticides and mycotoxins. So starting with one of the most important, which is the cannabinoid concentration of the sample, or the cannabis or hemp concentration. We use HPLC. HPLC is the preferred technique because you're able to capture both the acidic component of THCA and THC in the same test. In a gas chromatography experiment, the heat of the GC decarboxylates the THCA, so you only see THC in the final results. Because we want to confirm and quantitate everything in the plant from the start, we use HPLC. Here we're looking at 16 cannabinoids. All of these can be quantitated and analyzed in a sample. There is an opportunity to test for more cannabinoids, but most states regulate 12 to 16. And what we can see here is the chromatography of some real-life cannabis samples taken out of the Oregon and California market. What you'll see is that the chemistries do differ a little bit, and you'll see that the sample types are very different as well. We have a chocolate bar, a gummy, a hard candy, and even a lip balm. What this presents are some unique preparation differences and challenges potentially to the lab. So where we try to help is by providing a fairly precise, well thought out extraction and preparatory method for each of these different types of sample. Yes, there are a number of different samples out there, but we find most fall into the various categories we see here. Moving from the HPLC to LC-MS. This is a technique that has gained a lot of attention lately because it's a technique used to study or characterize pesticides. So our goal was to develop a sensitive method for both cannabis and hemp pesticides for all geographies and all regulatory lists. But why is this important? Some data extracted from California in late 2017 shows that there was over 60% overall detection rate of pesticides in cannabis products. This doesn't necessarily mean it was a high failing detection rate, but there was a presence of pesticides in the majority of the products off the shelf. I believe this is being improved in recent months with the increased level of testing California has mandated, but it is a reality that pesticides could be used in cultivation or production of these products. So the first challenge as a chemist is identifying the right MRM. These are the transitions between the ionized pesticide mass and its fragments that are caused in the quadrupole of the LC-MS. MRM is multiple reaction monitoring. And because pesticides come in a variety of different sizes and weights, there's a number of details that can be looked at to optimize the method. Taking acetylquinol as an example, we can see that doing a quick literature search for what's been done in other matrices for this pesticide is not sufficient to work in a cannabis environment. Cannabis is a very complex material with a lot of overlap with ions and suppression. What we were able to do is identify new MRMs that allowed a much cleaner signal from the pesticide when in a cannabis sample. This allows the quantitation to be significantly more stronger and give a better idea of if the pesticide is present in the sample. Another class of pesticides that have gained some attention are the pyrethrins, and we see 6 of them here. They share similar masses and similar characteristics in the LC-MS. And what was needed here was to perform a study on using the right MRM. And what you'll see here is that that study is fairly exhaustive in that it does take a number of different combinations of mass transfers to make the right method for this chemistry. In this example, the first transition selection and the sixth transition selection allowed us to get the appropriate signal to noise from the sample using this fragmentation pattern. Using 2, 3, 4, and 5 proved ineffective in quantifying the pesticide. And now we look at something slightly different. So depending on the type of pesticide and the molecular makeup, sometimes it's necessary to look at alternative ways of introducing that pesticide into the LC-MS. An example here is chlorophenol, and if we use the traditional ESI source, ESI is electrospray ionization, in positive mode, we see that we can detect 1 ppm in the top spectrum, but we cannot detect 0.1 ppm. This is a challenge because the Oregon state limit is 1 part per million, but the California is 0.1. So this ESI source introductory mode would not work for California. This can be addressed by using a different type of ionization on the LC-MS. And we are able to use APCI, atmospheric pressure chemical ionization. This is a second option for ionizing the pesticide before it enters the LC-MS. Often thought to be slightly softer in its nature, but what it does, it allows a much more robust signal to be attained for the pesticide. Here we see the signal to noise of over 50 being sufficient to quantitate down to 0.1 ppm necessary in California. So we are now confident that we can test all the pesticides on one instrument using a combination of the two sources. And this is also shown with compounds such as pentachloronitrobenzene, or PCMB. As you notice, this molecule does not have any protons or hydrogen atoms on it. So it's very challenging to ionize with traditional ESI. Usually this is done on the GC-MS instrument. But with APCI, we can actually ionize this successfully and quantitate this pesticide in the California list very easily. And what's important for any pesticide method or any method in general is the robustness. We know that cannabis samples are often quite challenging. They're sticky. They can leave deposits on the hardware as they're introduced to the LC-MS. So one of our studies was a durability study. Here we can see 500 samples being run over the course of the week. And even without the internal standard addition, the reproducibility is very strong, increasing to 1.9 with the use of the internal standard. These are very satisfactory stability results and provide a lot of confidence in labs running a lot of samples. So moving on from the LC and LC-MS chemistry, GC chemistry is also gaining a lot of interest and momentum in the market. And why? That is because you can break the two classes of chemistries down into terpenes and residual solvents. Terpenes are the aromatic molecules that all plants, flowers, fruit have. These give the aroma, the taste, and ultimately the market appeal in some of the cannabis and hemp products. Terpenes only contain carbon and hydrogen. Secondly, residual solvents are a very important class of GC chemistry compounds. These are potential impurities left over from the extraction process. Some are toxic, so understanding the level and making sure it is low or negligent is important to ensuring the quality of the cannabis and hemp product. This slide gives you an overview of the Headspace test or setup, and it's a very elegant and straightforward experiment. We see on the bottom left a vial. You can place the cannabis, hemp, flower, etc. sample in that vial, and that vial is then placed on the autosampler, and then the method is run. And what happens is the vial is heated, and the volatile components of that sample enter the gas above the vial. This is where the needle from the autosampler collects the gas and transfers that over to the GC or GC-MS. This is a very clean way of introducing the terpenes, as the solids from the cannabis or hemp sample remain in the vial after the process. And why are terpenes important? This is some data from a lab in California, SC Labs, and it shows that for the Emerald Cup, which is a significant event where a lot of cannabis and hemp samples are categorized and judged, we see that the mean difference for the cannabinoids between the winners and the overall is similar. This is quite interesting because some people think a high potency or high cannabinoid concentration means a valuable product. But in reality, it was the terpenes that can be shown to offer the added value for the winners. And here we see deviation between the overall and the winners being very clear in showing the importance of having higher terpene concentrations in the sample. This can also be seen in the literature. Doing a quick search, a number of papers are available that speak to the entourage effect of terpenes and cannabinoids. This is thought to be the relationship of how the chemistries work together once ingested or in the body to allow the medicinal effect of cannabis. Terpenes are not only found in cannabis, and on the left we see a number of the common cannabis terpenes and also an example of other plants or species that we see the same terpene in. And on the right, we're seeing a lot of value being placed on identifying the type of cannabis from its terpene profile. Users can look to see the kind of effect or terpene profile they want, and it's a very nice, colorful way of identifying the strains in the dispensary or medicinal environment that a patient can go to for that effect. And here we can see some of the chemistry of both residual solvents and terpenes. First, we're looking at a residual solvent chromatogram. This is, again, the California list. And as you can see, it's a fairly quick, less than 9-minute run for differentiating and quantitating all the residual solvents needed to pass the California regulations. But what you do notice is there are a couple peaks that are very close in retention time. You can see the pentane ethanol separation is very close, and you can see that the benzene 1,2-dichloroethane separation is very close. We can use GC mass spec to identify all these compounds cleanly. If a GC FID was used, then the runtime would have to be a little longer to allow the separation. But here we see the value of adding the GC-MS to the workflow in the lab. And next we see a very busy yet exciting chromatogram for the terpenes. Here we can see 38 terpenes being quantitated in about 8 minutes. Again, this is a reference to the California list. but it shows that there is great separation between these different structures in a very short time using GCMS. Moving from the volatiles now, we can talk about heavy metal analysis in cannabis and hemp. Heavy metals are important, and we know that food, pharma, testing of heavy metals is a daily affair, and with a lot of cannabis and hemp products ending up in similar product types, understanding heavy metals or the lack of, hopefully, is important. What we can see here is a snapshot of the states that require heavy metal testing, namely California, Colorado, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Washington, etc., and the regulatory limits they've set for the various types of cannabis product. Here we can see that there are particular categories for both medical, inhaled, topical in California. So having an ICP-MS method for all of these is important to ensure quality. And where the challenges can present themselves is making sure you are able to characterize all of the heavy metals in the sample. And we know a number of samples can be very diverse. Hard candies present a unique digestion challenge. High-fat oils, topicals, edibles also present a challenge. But we've been able to work with laboratories to identify the differences and produce methods that can successfully digest each of these samples. And this is a good point to speak to because making sure you have complete digestion is essential for getting a good result on the ICP-MS heavy metal assay. In the top left, we can see that traditionally for a flower sample, it is placed into a acidic environment and then it is then microwaved to be digested. PerkinElmer's microwave is unique in that it can go to higher pressures and temperatures than most, which allow a complete digestion. This is evident in the bottom left, and you see completely clear solutions. For a heavy metal digest, you want to see a clear acidic solution at the end. Any particulate or color in the solution means that it was not a successful digestion. The instrument in the middle is the microwave digester, and then the instrument on the right is the ICP-MS. This is a fairly well-known method for cannabis and hemp, and sample throughput can be as quick as 60 to 90 seconds. And lastly, chemistry that we didn't speak about at the beginning, but is gaining traction due to its convenience in the cultivation and manufacturing environment, is FTIR chemistry. FTIR, commonly used in the nutraceutical, food, raw material industries, is being adopted by PerkinElmer to be used in cannabis and hemp. Firstly, we're going to look at using near-infrared for understanding the potency of the cannabis sample. Here we can see the Spectrum 2 near-infrared instrument on the right and a small petri dish with cannabis flower in it. This is a non-destructive test, so that flower can then be used after the test. But what we see here is the flower being placed into a circular spinning cup, which spins to make sure a representative spectrum of that flower sample is taken for the near-infrared analysis. And once this is done, we're able to get the spectrum of the cannabinoid in that particular sample. And here we can see a number of samples overlaid and some subtle differences in the chemistry. Applying some mathematics and modeling that come included with the method, we're able actually to see the differences between THC components and CBD components of the flower. This allows us to put together a reference model so it can be used on the laboratory bench or the cultivation bench in a cultivation environment. And what this workflow looks like is here. We see a straightforward grind of the sample. It's placed on the near infrared, and initially a model is made, and that model comes from representative samples with supporting data for the cannabinoid. So once the model is made, and it has been, you can then run an unknown on that near infrared and expect the potency concentration to be stated or shown very quickly. So we now have a non-destructive test that takes about a minute to run in the lab or the cultivation environment. And this can be expanded upon in some of the literature out there that will be available at the end of this talk, if not on the website. And then a second application, which is becoming very popular in the extraction community, is monitoring the decarboxylation reaction of THCA to THC. We know that THCA is not utilized in the body as effectively as THC. So a lot of edible, topical extraction producers want to convert that THCA to THC. This is traditionally done by just heating the sample and stirring it until the CO2 bubbles dissipate. This is thought to be very inconsistent and offer poor quality control because overextending the heating will also drive off some of the terpenes that are volatile. We address this by using FTIR. And what you're looking at here is the stage or the sample of oil that's taken from a larger reaction batch. This can be taken every 10-15 minutes, very quickly and easily, but it can then provide insight into how quickly that decarboxylation reaction is happening. And we can see on the left the OH peak and the COOH peaks of the FTIR spectrum dissipating as the reaction continues. This provides a lot of information about what's happening in that reaction process and allows the user to model so that they have an idea exactly when they achieve the right THC concentration. And here we can see data from experimental and also from the model that show excellent correlation. So moving forward, there's now a fairly elegant, quick instrument option for looking at the decarboxylation of THCA to THC. And lastly, wrapping up, I would like to speak to the application readiness of PerkinElmer's team for cannabis and hemp. What's included with every instrument in a cannabis and hemp application is an SOP dedicated to that particular sample. And in this case, we're looking at the references for the pesticide, the potency, the heavy metal, and the residual solvent SOP that come with the instrument. These are designed to offer a step-by-step method and workflow that a lab can implement to be successful and minimize any or reduce the amount of development that might be needed for that sample. These are available for all the instruments, for all the cannabis markets we support. And extending the knowledge, please feel free to reference the application materials available online or contact me at the end of this webinar, and I'd be happy to share. But there are a number of publications co-authored by cannabis laboratories and collaborators and PerkinElmer that demonstrate some of the exciting chemistry that can be done today in this environment. We continue to grow this portfolio, so I'm excited to provide updates moving forward. And in summary, I'd just like to conclude that PerkinElmer is excited to be involved in this industry. And although that the chemistry is challenging, we have addressed a lot of the near-term needs of the laboratory to make the testing go as smooth as possible and provide the support. And that support comes in a variety of options, whether it be hardware, software, application support. We have an extended team that's excited to work with you as this industry grows. And lastly, as mentioned, we provide the standard operating procedure with all the instruments talked about today to make your life as straightforward and easy as possible, and also get you to testing cannabis and hemp samples as quickly as possible with the confidence that you need to be successful. And with that, I'd like to say thank you for your attention. I look forward to any questions. And if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to reach out to my email below. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Astill, for your presentation. A quick reminder for our audience on how to submit questions. Simply type them into the drop-down box located on the far left of your presentation window labeled Ask a Question and click on the Send button. Dr. Astill will answer as many questions as time permits. The first question is, can you use the PerkinElmer Headspace auto sampler on a non-PerkinElmer GC?
That's a great question, and the short answer is yes. We recognize that a number of laboratories already have GC or GC-MSs in their facility, but adding the terpene and residual solvent method does require a Headspace auto sampler. So we do have options to configure the PerkinElmer Headspace to a non-PerkinElmer GC.
Great, thank you. The next one is, can you run all the pesticides on one LC-MS?
That is a great question, and I could spend a lot longer speaking to that, but yes, the answer is we can, and that is possible because of the dual source nature of the LC-MS. So the compounds traditionally run on GC-MS can be run using APCI ionization on our LC-MS. Countries like Canada have a fairly long pesticide list of 95, but those have been successfully run on the one instrument. So as the regulatory world changes, we continually update, but no, we can run all the pesticides on one instrument.
Great, thank you. Next one is, can you send the standard operating procedure?
We can, but it is a piece of the overall solution from PerkinElmer's cannabis team. So it does come with the purchase of one of the instruments. It's not a public document. If you have questions about one of the SOPs in particular, I'd be happy to speak to some of the detail, but they do come with the instrument upon installation.
Thank you. What about cannabis food and beverage samples?
Yes, this is an exciting topic. We're seeing a huge amount of activity coming from the more traditional food, nutraceutical environments because they are being approached or they are interested in working with cannabis or hemp CBD. A lot of them already do have some expertise with the food sample, but there is some challenge when introducing the cannabis component. So we are excited to do research, method development, and work in the regulatory spaces where cannabis food products and beverages are available.
Okay, thanks. Looks like we have time for one more question. Can you look at CBD terpene profiles?
Yes. So the CBD topic, because of the growth in the hemp market in the U.S. recently, has been extensive. And CBD is one of the many cannabinoids present in the plant. So as I mentioned briefly at the beginning, HPLC can be used to characterize that concentration. Where we are seeing a huge amount of research is looking at the stability of CBD. A lot of CBD products are in beverages, topicals, and they need to be shelf stable. And cannabinoids don't like to be in hydrophilic environments. So we're actually looking at some interesting science about the stability of CBD, where other characterization techniques are required. And terpenes, to the same extent, very much so. I spoke to the method being used traditionally, GCMS, with the Headspace. We have got clients looking at over 150 terpenes in their product. Not all of them are at a large concentration, but there are a number that are very low. So looking at those with a GCMS allows the sensitivity. So we are excited to keep growing our application breadth. The terpene profiling chemistry is one we have considerable interest and resources focused on right now.
I would like to once again thank Dr. Astill for his presentation. Do you have any final comments?
Only to help where I can, and if people would like to reach out to me on my email, I'll be happy to reply as soon as possible. But no, thank you for the opportunity today.
Thanks again. I'd like to thank the audience for joining us today and for their interesting questions. Questions we did not have time for today will be addressed by the speaker via the contact information you provided at the time of registration. We would like to thank our sponsor, PerkinElmer, for underwriting today's educational webcast. This webcast can be viewed on demand through June 2019. Labroots will alert you via email when it's available for replay. We encourage you to share that email with your colleagues who may have missed today's live event. Until next time, goodbye.